I think that I'm a big fan of Tim Davie, the Director General of the BBC, but I think this has been handled very badly. And I'm beginning to think, as somebody who defends the BBC on regular and numerous occasions, it's time that the BBC leadership grew a pair. I mean, I do understand how annoying it is. It's like when your kids misbehave. You know, it's really annoying when Gary Lineker puts out tweets like this. He knows full well it's going to get everyone going. The analogy to 1930s Germany was ridiculous and over the top, but he also knew it would get people going. And then the headache is left not with him, but with Tim Davie and the leadership team. But at the same time, I don't see anything wrong with the 2018 statement. The only thing that's changed is that we have new leadership and they want this problem to go away. It may be long-term, it may suit the BBC, because Lineker, even though he's freelance, is a lightning rod because of the enormous amount of money he's paid by the BBC. So whenever anyone wants to have a go at the BBC, Gary Lineker is an extremely easy argument to take off the shelf and start thumping the BBC with.
I think that the bit I struggle with is why did the BBC News lead with this for 2 days before we get to this situation? If the BBC News hadn't led with it, we probably wouldn't have been in this situation. So it does feel
that's a good point.
They brought a bit of it on themselves, and impartiality is critical, but consistency is as important, and it's the consistency thing. You know, we hear about stuff that one of our colleagues, Lord Sugar, has said about individuals. You go back over time and you look at some of the comments other BBC presenters have said, and it's the consistency. You need to have consistency, and I think, you know, Richard Sharp and Tim Davie have painted themselves into a corner that they're going to really struggle to get out of now.
Do either of you think if Gary Lineker had tweeted support for Stop the Boats, if he'd said, this is a wonderful new policy, it's about time we got control of our borders, well done, Suella Braverman, which, again, let's remind ourselves, it would have also been a breach of BBC impartiality. Do you think he would have been pulled off air, Ed, for tonight's Match of the Day show? Or would have been asked to apologise for that tweet?
No.
Does that worry you?
Yes.
Okay, I'm glad we got that sorted.
People are losing sight of the principle, aren't they? And you're right. You know, it is. If you allow, this is why I refer to the BBC executive needing to grow a pair. You know, if you allow the government to intimidate you, and Richard Eyre's interview was fascinating because obviously I listened to all your show, Alexis. So I'm not just a kind of Johnny come lately person who just rocks up to do his bit on your show. But the Richard Eyre interview was.
I thought he just walked off and went to the
because he did take us back to what happened with Alistair Campbell.
Yes.
And the Iraq dodgy dossier stuff. And you've just got to... The BBC is in an unusual and unique position. But again, it's one of our most important institutions, really because what it stands for and the kind of its central role in our broadcasting ecology. And so you've got to tough it out often with government. And I think there feels like an element of... I know it sounds ironic to use this phrase. It feels like the element that the BBC is desperate for a quiet life, which is why they made this decision.
Iain, do you think there's any way back, either for the BBC or for Gary Lineker? Is there a solution to this problem?
Just bring him back on. If the BBC are going to get to a situation, especially the sort of senior management, where they are going to try and force an apology, we then have a standoff, and this continues and rumbles on. My take is, you know, especially with a trade union background, you just negotiate. You just sit down privately. You get a deal done, and you move forward. And my take is that Gary won't apologise. I don't know him, so I don't know that as a fact. But my guess would be that's where we're at. They have the conversation. He's back on next week, and we just move on.
Ed, do you think that's feasible?
It is feasible to a certain extent. I mean, the language used in the BBC statement is very unusual. You know, we have, what was it, stand aside or something. Having talked about the language, and I can't remember the exact phrase.
Well, they have suspended him now officially.
Yes, but it wasn't. Well, it wasn't. You're fired.
Yes. Yesterday was we've asked him to stand aside, something along those lines. Yeah. But today they've been very clear that he has been suspended by the BBC.
Yeah. So what a suspension achieves. Again, it's kind of halfway house, isn't it? But Yeah, so there is room for him to come back. The trouble is, it's kind of set down a marker, hasn't it? Where Gary Lineker knows full well that in 2 months' time, he can just do a tweet and detonate another major round, which will have us talking for another 5 days.